in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, political history was made in Quebec. For the first time since Confederation, a woman is now the leader of the provincial Liberal Party. Dominique Anglade is also the first Black person to lead a political party in that province. She was previously Deputy Premier under Liberal Premier Philippe Couillard, but Anglade was also one of the co-founding presidents of the Coalition Avenir Quebec. It's the party currently in power in Quebec under François Legault. The premier, who we just talked about, refuses to admit systemic racism exists in his province. We reached Quebec Liberal leader Dominique Anglade in Quebec City. Hi, Ms. Anglade. Nice to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start off with a question about, I think, a big conversation that we are having, certainly on this side of the border, but due to a lot of the events south of the border, and that is around the concept of systemic racism. And in particular, comments from the Premier of the province of Quebec, François Legault, who, while saying he wants to fight racism, denies that it is systemic. He says there is not systemic racism in Quebec. What do you think about that statement?
Well, first of all, the concept of systemic racism has been around for decades now. Back in the 1980s, the Supreme Court was already talking about this concept. So it's a well-known concept, normally well understood by all experts. I think François Legault has a very peculiar way to describe the situation. We're well aware of this situation, and because of that, we need to come up with action plans that are going to be able to really address the situation on racism and discrimination.
Is it possible to, as the Premier is doing, pledge or create that action plan without acknowledging the systemic nature of the racism?
Well, it's a question for the Premier. As far as I'm concerned, if you can acknowledge a situation and recognize that there is systemic racism and discrimination, you're much better prepared in order to solve the issue. That's my personal belief. That being said, he said he was going to put a committee in place. He said he was going to put an action plan in place. My responsibility as the leader of the opposition is to make sure that he delivers on those elements, and we will be following this topic quite closely.
On those elements, on some of the things that he has pledged to do, he's also pledged sort of a widespread consultation on figuring out exactly what measures are best suited to the cause. Have you been consulted at all, or has anyone from your party been consulted in that effort?
No, we haven't been consulted yet. I've mentioned it a number of times this week that we wanted to be consulted, and I would gladly offer my collaboration, because I think it's an issue that goes well beyond parties. It's an issue that we all need to work on in order to move the needle.
Should that consultation begin, I'm wondering what you think some of the things that the government should focus on are. And I ask, for example, because the Premier has pledged to increase the number of minorities in the civil service, in the public service. That's one thing specifically he has pledged to do. What other things do you think the government should be focusing its effort on as far as an action plan goes?
Well, definitely the police. Police is a key element. The private sector as well. If you think about unemployment and you look at the statistics, you realize that people that are Black or people that are from Aboriginal origins, we clearly have a number of issues in terms of discrimination. So I think you need to involve the private sector, and I think you need to involve society in general. So you talked about public servants, police, private sector.
When it comes to the police, what are your thoughts on the movement to defund police organizations?
I've been asked the question several times this week.
I'm sure.
There's no question that we need to spend more money on training people, on prevention. But it's hard honestly, I'm not an expert, so it's hard for me to answer and say we should defund police specifically. I think we need to look at the numbers and follow some of what the experts are saying, where the money should be coming from. I don't have a clear answer on that. But there is no question in my mind that in terms of training, in terms of how they're going to be analyzing the situation, how they're going to be doing prevention, there needs to be more money allocated to that.
I think what the movement, at least based on what I've read, sort of surmises is that the idea that money is necessarily going to be, the money that's allocated to police be spent on things like community supports, like mental health, rather than the police. So it's not necessarily taking away all money, but it's redirecting it to other places. I take your point that you don't know, for example, the exact answer in Quebec at this juncture, but is it something, as potentially a premier of that province, you're open to?
Well, there's no question that we need to have more money going towards mental care. There's no question that there needs to be more money towards the community services and the work that is being done by the police. So there's no question about that. It's more the question of where the money is coming from. So as a premier of Quebec, I would definitely spend money on this in particular.
I also want to ask you about something that I interviewed the mayor of Calgary a couple days ago, and this is about, again, based on the premier's comments on systemic racism, but I asked him about whether, what he thought about them, and he invoked Bill 21, and we've certainly had a lot of conversations about Bill 21 on this show, and just for our viewers so that they know what I'm talking about, that's the secularism law in Quebec that prohibits wearing religious symbols if you're in a position of authority in the civil service. And my understanding is your position is that you would not revoke that law, that you would not change that law. And Mayor Nenshi had talked about the fact, from his position at least, that he pointed to the secularism law, saying that is that not the definition of systemic racism? A provincial government passing a law that requires the notwithstanding clause to back it up. That's the best example of all. Do you agree with that assessment?
I'm not sure I would totally agree with this assessment. What I would tell you about Bill 21 is we voted against Bill 21 because we thought there were a number of issues, and we could talk about this for years about what the issues were regarding Bill 21. What I did say is the notwithstanding clause, I would not renew the notwithstanding clause. The bill was passed in Quebec. What needs to happen now is for this bill to go in front of the courts and for the courts to tell us what they think is valid, which article of Bill 21 they believe is sustainable without a notwithstanding clause. There are elements in Bill 21 that we voted in favor of. Like there are elements that we supported. When it came to what they were doing with people in authority, their description of what a person in authority is, we had, again, concerns, issues, we were against, we voted against the bill at the end. But I think from a democratic perspective, what needs to happen is for this bill to be tested in front of the courts.
What if, and I know it's a hypothetical, but I think our viewers would be interested to know if you were to become premier of the province. I mean, you wouldn't have to, in that situation, wait for the courts. You could actually act just on your beliefs. Would you, at that juncture, revoke the bill or reverse it?
My idea is not to renew the notwithstanding clause. That's my commitment, and I've been very clear on that.
Okay, before I let you go, I do want to also ask you about something that has been a topic of conversation in Ottawa, and that is, of course, Quebec's asking of the military to stay on until September in the long-term care homes. I'm hearing a bit of some of the conversation from the ministers today here. Bill Blair in the House of Commons saying it might not be the military, it might be the Red Cross that ends up staying till September. They seem to be indicating, though, that some sort of help will be there. I don't know if I'm getting any sort of definitive answer. From your position, should the military be there until September? And what signal does that?
We're the ones as a Liberal Party, we're the ones at the end realizing the situation that asked to get military support because we clearly were in a situation where we could not fix the problems with the people that we had. So I think we need to find a solution where we're going to be able to transition the new people that are engaged with the military. So if we can get the support until we get the right level of staffing, it would be better for Quebec for sure.
What responsibility does your party bear for the situation, the staffing situation that these homes found them in? Because we have heard a lot of people talk about sort of some of the administration, the administrative aspects of this that led to obviously no one could predict the pandemic, but there were circumstances in place that created a situation that ultimately contributed to some degree to what we're seeing right now.
They were clearly a situation where there was not enough staffing with regards to the senior homes. However, there are a number of decisions that were taken by the government. Why did we not do testing early on? Why is it that the people that were supposed to be tested were not tested? Why did we have patients moving from one place to the next? And we had also workers moving from one place to the next. Those issues that are still not addressed today are really related to the decisions that this government has been taking. So I think they need to take responsibility, especially when you think about possible other wave that could come. We need to make sure that we are ready, and I'm not sure that this situation has been addressed so far.
Certainly, we've put those questions to ministers of the government in Quebec, but respectfully, my question was, what level of responsibility does your party bear, having been in government prior to this?
And I said this before, we had part of responsibility. If you look at the senior homes, the fact that they were already fragile, the fact that we didn't have enough workers, we understand that it was part of our responsibility under our government. So I was quite open about this. I think we need to recognize this as a part of responsibility, but this doesn't explain the situation that we have today.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it, Ms. Anglade.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.